The city lights of Los Angeles glowed like 1,000 restless stars when Keanu Reeves stepped out of his car and looked at the studio gate. It was the same place where his greatest moments had been filmed, the same place that had made his name echo across the world. But tonight he felt only silence inside. The guards greeted him respectfully, yet something in their eyes asked a quiet question. Why was he there so late, alone, and without his usual calm smile? The new film was supposed to be his masterpiece. The director had written it just for him. The world was waiting for it, and the media was calling it his career-defining role. Yet deep inside, Keanu felt a growing discomfort that words could not explain. For weeks he had seen meetings filled with cold ambition. He had watched how decisions were made not for art, but for control. And somewhere in those rooms, he had seen someone else being quietly pushed aside. That someone was Sandra Bullock. She had been cast as the female lead beside him. The reunion of two beloved actors had sent fans into excitement. But behind the smiles and headlines, Sandra was fighting an invisible storm. The producers doubted her schedule, questioned her emotional tone, and whispered that maybe she was no longer the right fit. One night after a late shoot, she overheard them talking about replacing her with someone younger. She had walked out of that room with tears in her eyes, but kept silent because she did not want pity. Keanu noticed the change immediately. She no longer laughed between takes. Her hands trembled when she read her lines. One evening, as they rehearsed a difficult, emotional scene, he paused and asked softly, "Are you okay, Sandra?" She smiled faintly and said, "I'm fine, just tired." But her eyes told the truth. She was scared of losing not just a role, but her dignity. Keanu went home that night and sat by the window for hours. He thought about the world's noise, the endless chase for fame, and how easily kindness was forgotten in the rush for success. He remembered something his mother once told him when he was young. She said, "Real strength is not about standing in the light. It's about knowing when to step back so others can stand." Those words came back to him with painful clarity the next morning. He called the director for a private meeting. Everyone thought it was about new ideas or script changes. But what he said shocked the entire production team. Keanu told them he wanted to leave the project. He said the role no longer felt right for him, that he wanted to focus on other stories. His voice was calm but firm. The director tried to convince him. The producers begged him to reconsider, but he simply smiled and said, "This story will shine brighter without me." Within hours, news spread like wildfire. Every media outlet began speculating. Had he fallen sick? Had he had a conflict with the team? Was he retiring? Nobody knew the truth. The internet exploded with questions. Fans made endless theories, and journalists camped outside his home. But Keanu stayed silent. He gave no statement, no explanation. He disappeared quietly, leaving only a mystery behind. Meanwhile, Sandra sat in her small dressing room staring at the news on her phone. Her name was now being mentioned as the possible new lead. Her heart pounded. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty. She wondered if Keanu's exit meant the end of the film or a new beginning. A few days later, the studio called her and offered her the main role. She hesitated but finally accepted, thinking it might be her only chance to prove herself again. Filming restarted after a short delay. Sandra poured her heart into every scene. She arrived early, stayed late, and often practiced alone under the dim stage lights. But sometimes, when the set was quiet, she felt an odd presence around her. A cup of coffee would appear on her table with her favorite flavor written on it. A note would be left near the camera saying, "You're doing great. Don't doubt yourself." She thought it was from the crew. But no one ever admitted to leaving them. Days turned into weeks, and the movie started taking shape beautifully. Sandra's performance amazed everyone. The director called it the most emotional work of her life. But deep inside, Sandra could not shake one thought from her mind. Why had Keanu left so suddenly? And why did she feel as if he was still watching over her in silence? One night, as she was packing up after a long shoot, she found an envelope tucked under her script. Her name was written neatly on the front. She opened it slowly and read a single sentence written in familiar handwriting. "Sometimes the kindest way to lead is to step aside." Her hands shook. She recognized that writing instantly. It was Keanu's. She sat down on the cold floor of the studio, tears filling her eyes. In that single moment, everything began to make sense. The quiet exit, the mystery gifts, the feeling that she was never alone. He had left not for himself, but for her. The thought left her speechless. She whispered softly, "Why would you do that for me?" But she already knew the answer. He had always believed that success meant nothing if it could not lift others. He had seen her light dimming under pressure and decided to give her the space she deserved. Outside, the city continued to shine brightly. Cameras flashed, headlines rolled, and the world kept guessing the reason behind Keanu's departure. But only two hearts knew the truth. One had stepped away with quiet grace, and the other was learning to shine again. And in that silence between fame and friendship, a story of true kindness began to unfold. Weeks passed since Keanu's quiet exit from the film, yet his name never left the headlines. Every morning, new stories appeared, some calling him unpredictable, others saying he had lost interest in fame. Fans debated endlessly, wondering what had really happened. But while the world searched for answers, Keanu stayed away from cameras, interviews, and events. He spent his days in quiet places, reading, walking by the sea, and visiting small local theaters where no one recognized him. He watched the world move on without him and felt a strange peace in that silence. The spotlight had followed him for decades, but now he finally saw how heavy its glow could be. He realized that true freedom was not in being seen, but in being unseen while doing something good. One evening, while walking through a narrow street in Venice Beach, he passed a small bookstore. A familiar voice came from inside. Sandra was sitting at a corner table, signing a few charity posters. Their eyes met through the glass window for a second, before she looked down quickly, unsure how to react. He entered quietly, smiling softly, as if no time had passed. "You disappeared," she said, her tone calm but full of emotion. "Sometimes that's the only way to hear yourself," he replied. There was a long silence between them, filled with unsaid words. Finally, she asked, "Why did you leave the film?" "Keanu, I need to know the real reason." He looked at her kindly and said, "Because some lights deserve to shine on their own." She frowned, confused but touched. "You think I couldn't do it without you?" "No," he said softly. "I knew you could, but they didn't. I wanted them to see what I already saw." Sandra sat quietly, her eyes glistening. "You gave up everything for me," she whispered. "No," he smiled. "I didn't give up anything. I made space for something better." Before she could say more, he stood up and handed her a small folded paper. "Keep this for later," he said. Then he left as quietly as he had arrived. When she opened it later that night, she found only 4 words written inside. "Keep believing in yourself." Filming continued over the next few months, and Sandra gave her most powerful performance yet. Every emotion she had once held back now flowed freely. The crew noticed her confidence and warmth. They often said it felt like Keanu's spirit still lingered on set, guiding everyone gently. But even as her star began to rise again, Sandra couldn't shake one thought. She wondered what Keanu was really doing now and if he was truly at peace. One day, she asked a journalist who had once covered both of them, "Have you heard anything about him lately?" The journalist nodded. "He's been funding small independent film projects under a different name. No one knows it's him. He says he wants to give young filmmakers a chance." Sandra's heart warmed. That sounded exactly like him, helping others quietly, without needing applause. She smiled faintly, realizing that he hadn't walked away from art. He had simply walked toward a different kind of light. Months later, the film finally premiered. The theater was packed, lights bright, red carpet glittering. Sandra stood nervously backstage, ready to face the crowd. She knew tonight would decide everything: her performance, her reputation, maybe even her future. The director told her Keanu had been invited but hadn't confirmed. She tried not to think about it, though her eyes searched the crowd once the film began. As the movie played, the audience grew silent. Every scene felt alive, real, filled with emotion. When the final credits rolled, the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood cheering her name. For a moment, Sandra felt the weight of years lift off her shoulders. She looked around but didn't see him anywhere. Later that night, at the after-party, someone handed her a small gift box. Inside was a silver charm shaped like a candle with a note attached. It read, "The world is brighter when you burn with purpose." She smiled through tears. She didn't need to ask who it was from. She could almost hear his calm voice in her mind. That same night, somewhere across the city, Keanu sat in a small diner reading about the film's success on his phone. He saw her smiling face on the front page and quietly folded the newspaper. The waiter asked, "Aren't you going to watch it yourself?" He smiled. "I already did in spirit." As he walked out into the cool night air, he looked up at the stars and whispered, "She found her light." But what Keanu didn't know was that something much larger was unfolding behind the scenes. His act of kindness had changed more than just one career. It had started a quiet chain of goodwill in Hollywood. Young actors began speaking about respect and humility. Directors started giving chances to forgotten artists, and fans began celebrating kindness more than gossip. Still, there was one truth that Sandra didn't yet know, one secret that Keanu had kept carefully hidden. And when she discovered it, everything she thought she knew about his sacrifice would change forever. The world now spoke of Sandra Bullock with admiration. Her film became a global success, and her performance was described as the most powerful of her career. She received awards, interviews, and endless praise. People called it her comeback, her rebirth, her second golden age. But Sandra knew deep inside that the light she carried was not hers alone. It was shared. It was borrowed from the quiet strength of someone who had stepped aside for her to rise. Months after the movie's release, she returned home from an awards ceremony late at night. The golden trophy still gleamed in her hands, but her heart felt strangely heavy. She placed it on her table and whispered softly, "You should have been here, Keanu." The room was silent, except for the faint hum of city lights outside. She missed his calm presence, the way he never needed to speak much to say everything. As she walked into her study, her eyes fell on a small brown envelope resting beside a stack of old scripts. She frowned. It had no stamp, no delivery mark, only her name written in neat handwriting she knew too well. Her heart skipped a beat. She tore it open gently and pulled out a folded letter and a small photograph. The photo showed the entire film crew on the last day of shooting. She was in the middle, smiling. Behind her, half hidden in the corner, was Keanu. He hadn't been there that day, at least not officially. Yet here he was, standing near the shadows, smiling faintly like a guardian watching from a distance. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. "Dear Sandra, if you are reading this, it means the story has found its voice. I wanted you to know that walking away was not about leaving something behind. It was about giving something forward. You have always carried the kind of grace this world forgets to see. I saw it every day on set. The way you treated everyone with respect, the way you stayed humble when fame grew loud. There will be days when people will question your worth. There will be days when silence will hurt more than words. In those moments, remember this. Real kindness never asks for attention. It simply keeps giving. You will do great things, Sandra." "I already know that. With respect and light, Kay." Tears filled her eyes as she read the letter again and again. It wasn't just a message. It was a reminder of who she was and what he saw in her. She clutched the paper to her heart and whispered, "Thank you." The next morning, she called her assistant and asked for the address of Keanu's quiet studio office, the one he used for his small charity projects. She wanted to thank him in person, to tell him how much his kindness had changed her. But the assistant returned an hour later looking confused. "The place is empty," she said. "Someone said he closed it a few weeks ago. He left no address." Sandra's heart sank. She wondered where he had gone. Maybe he was somewhere far away, starting another small project that no one would know about. Maybe he was just tired of being found. But something inside her refused to let it end there. She started visiting the local art events and charity fundraisers he used to attend. She met people who told her stories of quiet donations, of cameras paid for small film schools, of medical bills cleared for struggling crew members, all done anonymously. Every time she heard one of those stories, she smiled because she knew. Meanwhile, in a quiet village outside Los Angeles, Keanu was helping a group of young artists build a community theater. He spent his days painting walls, carrying props, and teaching small workshops on storytelling. He never mentioned who he was. To the locals, he was just Mr. Reeves, the man who loved helping others find their voice. One evening, an old friend who worked at the film studio visited him. "You know, Sandra's film just broke another record," the man said. "She's everywhere now. She even mentioned you in her last speech." Keanu smiled quietly. "I saw that," he said. "She deserves every bit of it," the friend sighed. "You could have been standing beside her, you know. People still talk about your choice." Keanu looked out the window at the setting sun and replied, "Sometimes it's not about standing beside someone. It's about standing behind them so they never fall." Back in the city, Sandra continued her search. One night after a charity event, an old cameraman handed her a folder. "This was left at the studio for you months ago," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside was another letter, shorter this time, written in the same calm handwriting. "Sandra, when people look back at your journey, they will talk about talent, fame, and awards. But I hope someone remembers the way you made others feel on set, because that is the real legacy. Fame fades, kindness remains." Beneath the letter was a small ticket stub from their first film together decades ago. She smiled through tears. The ticket had faded, but the memory had not. It was from the day they met, two young dreamers who believed that movies could change hearts. She sat alone in her car, holding that ticket tightly. "You changed mine," she whispered. But destiny had one more surprise waiting. A few weeks later, Sandra received an unexpected call from a local journalist who had been covering charity programs. He said, "We're doing a story about an anonymous donor who has been helping hundreds of crew workers across Hollywood. There are photos from security cameras, and we think you might recognize him." She hesitated, unsure if she wanted to confirm what she already felt. When she saw the images later that evening, her heart stopped. It was Keanu carrying food boxes into a shelter, laughing with volunteers, fixing lights for a school play, completely unnoticed by the world that once watched his every move. For a long time, she sat in silence. She finally understood that his walk away from the spotlight wasn't a retreat. It was a deeper purpose. He had not disappeared. He had simply chosen a quieter stage where no one clapped, but many hearts were healed. As she looked at his picture on her phone, a gentle smile spread across her face. "You didn't walk away from the spotlight, Keanu," she whispered. "You walked toward kindness." But what she didn't know was that the biggest truth behind his decision was still hidden. There was a reason deeper than friendship, deeper than kindness, that he had kept secret all along. And when that truth finally came to light, it would leave the world speechless. The next few weeks felt different for Sandra. Everywhere she went, people spoke about compassion, humility, and how Keanu Reeves had once again reminded the world that fame meant nothing compared to goodness. But for her, it was not just admiration. It was a quiet ache that never left her heart. She could not stop thinking about the question that kept echoing in her mind. Why had he done it so completely, so silently, as if there was more behind it than anyone could see? One morning, she received a handwritten invitation. It was from a small film academy in California that was holding an event to honor anonymous donors who had supported student projects. The letter mentioned a man named Kay, whose identity remained secret, but whose kindness had kept the academy alive during its hardest years. Sandra knew at once who it was. She decided to go, hoping that maybe this time she would finally meet him again. The auditorium was modest, filled with young filmmakers who looked at her with admiration. She took a seat near the back, quietly observing. The host walked up to the stage and spoke with gratitude about a man who had supported more than 50 students without ever asking for credit. Then he said, he couldn't be here today, but he sent a message. The lights dimmed, and a video began playing. It was Keanu, standing in a small workshop surrounded by children and art materials. He looked simple, wearing a plain black shirt, his expression calm. "The real stories," he said, "are not told on screens. They happen in classrooms, in small theaters, in homes where people still believe in kindness. We all have light inside us. Some share it loudly, others quietly. But every light matters." The crowd erupted in applause, some wiping away tears. Sandra watched in silence, her heart swelling with emotion. It was the first time she had seen him in months, even if only on a screen. When the event ended, the host handed her a small envelope. "He left this here in case you came," the man said with a smile. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was another letter. "Dear Sandra, I'm proud of you. Not because of the awards or the records, but because you stayed kind in a world that tests kindness every day. If I hadn't stepped away, I would have taken something from you that you needed to find on your own. Belief. You were meant to lead this story. I just helped you begin it. K." She folded the paper carefully and held it close. She wanted to cry, but she also wanted to smile. It was so like him, to teach without claiming to be a teacher, to love without demanding anything in return. That night, when she returned home, her phone buzzed with a message from a mutual friend. It said, "You might want to see this. It's about Keanu." Her heart skipped a beat. She clicked the link and saw an article from a local hospital. It spoke about a quiet foundation that had been funding cancer treatments for children, founded by an anonymous benefactor who had once lost someone dear to him. The article mentioned a name, the Angel Foundation, registered by Reeves years ago. Tears welled up in her eyes as memories rushed back. She remembered the day, long ago, during their first movie together, when Keanu had spoken softly about his sister's battle with illness. He had said, "I just want to help others the way I couldn't help her." Now she realized that his choice to walk away was not just about her film. It was about dedicating his time and resources to what truly mattered, saving lives, inspiring hope, spreading kindness. Sandra sat quietly in her living room, staring at the flickering lights outside the window. She whispered to herself, he didn't step away from acting. He stepped toward healing. Days later, she decided to visit the hospital mentioned in the article. When she arrived, the staff greeted her warmly. They guided her through a bright corridor filled with colorful paintings made by children. At the end of the hall, there was a wall covered in small golden plates, each engraved with a name. In the center, one plate simply said, "For all the forgotten lights." A nurse noticed Sandra staring at it and said, "That was his idea. He said not every good act needs a name." Sandra smiled through tears. "That sounds exactly like him." As she was about to leave, a little girl ran up to her holding a drawing. "Are you the lady from the big screen?" the girl asked shyly. Sandra nodded and smiled. The child handed her a picture of a man helping another person stand up, drawn in bright colors. "He told us stories," the girl said proudly. "He said the strongest people are the ones who help others shine." Sandra knelt down and asked gently, "What's his name?" The girl grinned. "Mr. K." Sandra felt her chest tighten. She looked at the drawing again and whispered softly, "You're still teaching kindness, even here." That evening, as she walked out of the hospital, she noticed the sun setting over the city skyline. The sky turned gold and soft pink, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. Keanu hadn't vanished from the world. He had simply chosen to exist where light was most needed. But there was one thing still unsolved. How had he known she was about to be replaced in the movie before anyone told her? That question lingered like a whisper in her heart, and she promised herself she would find the answer. She didn't know that the truth behind it was something she could never have imagined. It was not only about kindness. It was about a promise made long ago that would soon return to change everything. A soft rain fell over Los Angeles as Sandra drove through the quiet streets, her mind circling around the same question that refused to fade. How had Keanu known she was going to be removed from the film before anyone else did? She remembered the way he had left without warning, the way he had spoken about making space for her light. It was too precise, too timely. It felt like something more than instinct. It felt like he had been protecting her from something unseen. Later that night, unable to sleep, she went through her old notebooks, emails, and production notes from that time. She found nothing out of place, only the ordinary chaos of movie life. But as she flipped through one of her old scripts, an envelope slipped out. She didn't remember placing it there. Inside was a message printed on studio letterhead, dated months before the filming began. It read, "Meeting regarding cast restructuring next week. Keep confidential." Her name was listed under review. Keanu's wasn't. Her breath caught. This meant that long before she even knew, he had somehow found out she was in danger of being replaced. But how the truth pressed heavier on her mind. She needed to know. The next morning, she called one of the assistant producers who had worked closely with Keanu at that time. He hesitated to talk, but finally agreed to meet her at a small cafe. He looked nervous, glancing around before speaking. "There were talks about removing you," he admitted quietly. Some of the producers wanted a new face. Keanu heard about it by accident. He came straight to me and said he wouldn't let that happen. "He never told me," she whispered. "He didn't want to embarrass you," the man continued. "He told the director that if they made that decision, he would walk away. He made it sound like his own choice so you wouldn't be blamed." Sandra sat frozen, her eyes filling with tears. "So he took the blame just to save me?" "Yes," the man said softly. "And he made sure no one ever mentioned it to you. He said you deserved to shine without guilt." For a long time, she said nothing. The noise of the cafe faded around her. She could almost hear his calm voice again, that quiet reassurance in every word. The kindest way to lead is to step aside. She finally understood what he truly meant. He hadn't just given up a film for her. He had shielded her from humiliation, from the cruel politics of fame, from the heartbreak of being rejected unfairly. Driving home, she felt a mix of gratitude and sorrow. The world had seen his act as mystery, but she now saw it as sacrifice. He had lost nothing by leaving. He had gained peace by protecting her. That evening, she stood before her award shelf. Each golden trophy gleamed under the dim light, but one spot was empty. She decided to place something there instead, a small framed copy of his letter, the one that said, "Real kindness never asks for attention." She whispered softly, "You never asked, but the world will remember." The following week, Sandra received an invitation to speak at a global conference on creative ethics. She hesitated at first, but then realized it was the perfect place to tell his story, not as gossip, but as inspiration. She prepared her speech carefully, choosing her words with love and respect. On the day of the event, the hall was filled with artists, directors, and students. She stepped up to the stage and looked at the sea of faces before her. The lights were bright, just like the film sets she once stood on. She began quietly. "Years ago," she said, "someone I deeply respect made a choice that changed my life. He stepped away from a film so I could stay. At the time, I didn't understand why. But later I learned that he did it to protect me, not from failure, but from unfairness. He carried my burden without ever telling me. That is what true kindness looks like." The hall fell completely silent. She continued, her voice steady but emotional. "We often think heroes are loud and seen, but sometimes they are the ones who walk away quietly, leaving space for others to rise. And I stand here today because one such person believed in me." When she finished, the audience rose in applause. Some wiped their eyes. She saw young actors holding hands, nodding as if they too had felt unseen kindness in their lives. After the event, as she walked toward her car, an old janitor stopped her. He held a small card. "This was left for you at the entrance," he said with a gentle smile. She took it and unfolded it carefully. It was written in that same familiar handwriting. "Thank you for telling them. But remember, Sandra, kindness is not a story we tell. It is a light we keep alive. Kay." Her eyes filled with tears again. How did he always know where to find her? How did he always know the right moment to remind her what truly mattered? She smiled softly, pressing the card to her chest. That night, back at home, she placed the card beside the framed letter. She looked at the quiet corner of her room where the two messages now rested together, a shrine of silent goodness. A reminder that fame fades but compassion lives forever. Yet even as she felt peace, one final mystery lingered. The man who had given so much had disappeared again, leaving no trace, no interviews, no appearances. And just when she thought his story had ended, destiny prepared one last meeting, one that would reveal a secret deeper than kindness itself, a truth that would shake her heart and bring the story full circle. Months passed and life moved quietly for Sandra. Her film continued to inspire people, and her speech about unseen kindness went viral across the world. Many called it the most heartfelt story in Hollywood. Yet deep inside, she still wished to see Keanu again, even for a single moment, to say the words she never got to say, thank you. One rainy afternoon, she received a message from a small community center on the edge of town. It said, "You are invited to attend the dedication of a new children's art hall built by an anonymous donor." Curiosity led her there. The place was warm, filled with laughter, paint, and light. Children were drawing stories of hope on the walls. On one side of the hall stood a plaque that read, "For those who light others' paths." A woman beside her whispered, "The man who built this used to come here every week. He never told anyone his name. We just called him Mr. K." Sandra felt her eyes sting. She turned slowly and saw him across the hall, sitting with a group of children, helping them paint tiny stars on a mural. He looked older, calmer, peaceful. When he noticed her, he smiled softly, as if he had been expecting her all along. She walked toward him, her heart pounding. "You could have told me," she said quietly. He smiled. "You didn't need to know. You just needed to believe in yourself. You gave me everything," she whispered. "No," he said gently. "You already had it. I just cleared the clouds so your light could pass through." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of children's laughter filled the hall. Then she handed him a small frame, a copy of his first letter. "I kept this," she said. "It reminded me to stay kind even when the world wasn't." He looked at it, then said, "That means it worked." The sun broke through the clouds outside, casting golden light into the room. The children's mural shimmered, filled with stars. Keanu looked around and said softly, "See this, Sandra, this is what real fame looks like. It's when hearts remember kindness more than faces." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You didn't walk away from the spotlight, Keanu. You became the light." He nodded quietly, and for the first time in a long while, they both felt at peace. As the children laughed and the hall filled with warmth, the story that began with sacrifice ended in silent grace. A reminder that real greatness is not found in standing before cameras, but in helping others shine.